Hey, welcome to 49cc Scoot. My name's Brent. If you're a regular to this channel, this project's a little bit different than what I typically get into, but I will be building something, and it will be scooter related. So the holidays were coming up, and I do enjoy going out looking at Christmas lights. If nothing else, it's an excuse to ride a scooter. But I've never really been into the spirit of decorating around my house or my yard, because to me, a lot of times it just feels like work. If I'm just wrapping a tree with some lights or wrapping some lights around a pole or putting them up on gutters, that's not exciting to me, so I just don't get into it and I don't bother. However, this year I really wanted to put something out there, and I thought maybe I could do something that I would kind of get excited about one of my hobbies. So one of the biggest things in my life are scooters, and I thought maybe I could do a decoration related to scooters, like perhaps a Santa Claus riding a scooter doing a wheelie. He's got to be doing a wheelie, he can't just be riding around out there. So that's what this video is going to be all about. I'm going to try to build a wireframe of Santa Claus riding a scooter doing a wheelie. All I really knew when I started this project was that I wanted to build Santa Claus on a scooter doing a wheelie, and that I wanted it to be a wireframe, but I really had no idea how to go about doing this. So I got on YouTube and looked for some ideas and inspiration. Luckily, there are some other people that are putting out videos like this, and a few of them are building wireframes out of 1/4-inch steel round bar or rebar. And they look to be very heavy duty, very high quality wireframes. However, I wasn't sure if I wanted to get into that right away. I didn't know how the project was really going to go, or if I would lose interest in it, so I didn't want to invest a whole lot of money, because a bunch of 1/4-inch steel round bar or rebar is fairly expensive, and also you can't bend that by hand. You're not just going to take 1/4-inch steel and bend it easily by hand. So you're going to have to use either a torch and heat, which is going to be pretty difficult for long curves and such, or you've got to get a roller and use that to make all of your curves. That also means that you're going to be back and forth on the roller a lot until you get used to it, trying to figure out exactly how you need to set that up to get the curves just right. So that sounded like a lot of trouble and a lot of expense to me, and I didn't really want to do that for my first go around before I learned if I was even really interested enough to keep going on a project like this. So I kept looking, and I found a person that goes by the name of Idiocracy on YouTube, and they put up videos of wireframes that they or their family have built that are made of 9-gauge galvanized steel fence or bracing wire. And when I looked up this wire, it's a lot cheaper than buying 1/4-inch rod by a long shot. It can be bent by hand, and it's a lot more lightweight. So I thought that might be a good way for me to get started and try this project out. The first step for me was to find some of this 9-gauge steel wire locally, because I hadn't actually seen it being bent on video, and I wanted to make sure that I could bend it easily enough by hand, and also that it felt sturdy enough that it would hold up out in the yard or in storage. So I looked around online, and the best deal that I could find in my area is Tractor Supply was selling 171 feet or 10 pounds of it for $16.99, so I went there. This is how big the roll of it is. This is actually half of it because I've already done my project. But that's the size of it. It measures about 144 thousandths of an inch, according to my calipers, in thickness. And it was indeed easy enough to bend by hand. It's not the easiest thing you'll ever bend, but it's got enough strength that it seems that it will retain its shape fairly well, though you will have to be careful with it. I didn't buy anything other than the wire to begin with because it was a pretty low investment, and I thought if it does turn out to be harder than I think it is, I'm not out a whole lot of money if I did decide to give up on the project. So I just started with a wire, and the next thing that I needed was a design. One of the most important things about this project to me was to come up with something original and unique. I didn't want something that everyone else has out in their yard. I wanted something that I created from scratch. So I decided to draw my own design. And this is what I came up with. I just do Santa Claus riding as if he's going down a flat road because it's a lot easier that way to me. But I made sure that if you tilt it, it does look like he's doing a wheelie. It looks natural enough. The next challenge was trying to draw this large enough to make a template to bend the wire to. Because the plan is, just like I had seen in some YouTube videos, to draw this out on a 4x8 sheet of wood. Unfortunately, I only had T111 around, which is not great for this project. but it ended up working in the long run. Some plywood would be a lot better for you. Anyway, so draw it out full scale, and then once it's drawn out, you can easily bend your wire and match it up to the drawing. So I stuck my Santa Claus here on the wall, and I laid out a piece of 4x8 wood on a couple of sawhorses, and I started trying to draw it. Unfortunately, I did not do very well drawing this large. It's a whole lot easier to draw on a piece of paper like that than it is to draw something that's basically 6 feet tall by about 5 feet long. I didn't want to give up just because I couldn't draw this out basically life size, and I certainly don't have access to some gigantic commercial printer to print it out. So I found a way that I could print this out on a bunch of pieces of paper and then lay it out to create one large drawing. I scanned my drawing to create an image file. Then I used OpenOffice, which is a free program, to turn my image file into a PDF file. Then that PDF can be opened with Adobe Acrobat or Adobe Reader, and you can go to print and choose poster for the printing option, and that will print out as one large image on a bunch of pieces of paper. And you can choose the scaling for that. So for example, if you've got an image that is 6 inches wide and you know that you want it to be 60 inches wide, then you need to do 10 times scaling, or 1000% scale. So you can adjust that scale to get whatever size you'd like out of it. It's just going to take more pages or more paper the larger you make it. Once it was printed out, then I needed to lay out the design onto the wood. One of the problems in my case is that my design is over 5 feet wide and nearly 6 feet tall, but I've got a 4x8 sheet of board here, so that's not going to work too well. What I decided to do was lay out the bottom half of it and start on that, and then I figured if the bottom half went okay, I could peel that up, lay out the top half, and then later join those two together. I used transparent tape to keep my pieces of paper together, and then once I had most of it done, I used masking tape to go around the edges and make sure that it was secured to the boards. With the drawing in place, I could finally start bending wire and trying to match it to my picture. I started with the wheels and tires, making full or semi-circles. Because of the way the wire was formed into a roll when I bought it, it already had a natural curve, but the curve is not nearly tight enough for the small wheels and tires that I wanted to do. I found bending the wire around buckets to be an easy way to make circles roughly the size that I needed. You will need to use round objects smaller than the size that you're trying to create, because the spring will rebound a bit. A little bit of fine-tuning by hand helped to finish matching the wire to the drawing. Here you can see I found the wheel chock on my scooter bench to be a good tool to help me bend the wheels. Use whatever you can find that makes the process easier for you. Many of the bends and straightening can be done by hand, as you see here with the fender. You may notice that the wire doesn't match my drawing exactly. That's because I was never totally happy with what I drew, and I decided that I would adjust that when I made the wireframe. I made the entire body of the scooter out of one piece of wire to save me some joining later. After having some difficulty making bends while trying to keep the wire in place on the board so that I could actually tell what I was doing, I started using some fencing staples, which are basically U-shaped nails, to hold the long piece of wire in place, and that made it a whole lot easier. I moved on to making smaller pieces like Santa's boot or suit cuffs. Tight bends were done in a vise. Sometimes I'd put an object in the vise and bend around it to help me get the shapes that I wanted. Once you figure out how to make a few bends, it's really just a matter of following the drawing and spending the time to make it match up well. Some of the small pieces were joined together when they were made. That way I could do it right on the bench and make use of the vise instead of having to do it on the board. I used the flux core welder to join the wires together, but multiple welding procedures could work for this, and stick welding seems to be pretty popular. I've even read of people joining these together with cable ties by creating overlaps, but I think welding will provide a better final product. Because this wire is galvanized, you need to take precautions when welding it. The galvanized coating is primarily zinc, and it also contains a little bit of lead in there, so it's pretty nasty stuff. At very least, you want to work in a well-ventilated area with plenty of airflow, or if you are in a confined space, then you're going to need some sort of exhaust system to remove the smoke, and try to keep yourself out of the smoke to the best of your ability. Wearing a respirator in addition to that would be even better protection. I chose to grind the galvanized coating off of the ends of the pieces that I'd be welding together, both to reduce the exposure to fumes and also hopefully to create a better weld without that galvanized stuff being a part of it. Eventually I got all of the pieces for the bottom bent and started joining those together. I was concerned about welding on paper and wood because of fire risk, but using a piece of aluminum below my welding areas worked fine for me. I did keep a fire extinguisher nearby just in case. After getting it all together, I decided to add some bracing. Some of it was necessary for joining areas like the wheels and tires, and in other spots it was just to add a bit of structural integrity. When all of that was complete, the lower half seemed pretty sturdy to me, but I flipped it over and welded the opposite side as well for added insurance. Then I repeated the entire process for the top half of my design. When both halves were complete, I welded them together. I finished the frame by giving it multiple coats of paint on each side. Even though the galvanized wire is corrosion resistant, it was ground and burned off in many areas during the welding process, so paint is needed to keep it from quickly rusting. At this point I had a complete wireframe and I needed to figure out how to light it, and there are tons of options in string lights, rope lights, and even pixels. I decided to use mini LED lights in 100 count strings and started by picking up 6 roughly 30-foot long strings, thinking this would be plenty. I got 2 strings of white, 2 green, and 2 red, as well as an 800 count of zip ties. You may want to consider spending a little bit more to buy lights that don't all go out if one goes out. The lights that I bought are wired in 3 sections of 30 to 35 lights per 100 string. So if one light goes out in a section, basically a third of the entire string is going to go out until I find that light and replace it, which is going to be pretty tough when it's actually mounted on the wireframe. LED bulbs of different colors tend to have different resistance values. So if you were to swap, say, a green light in place of a red LED light, then that would change the resistance value, and either the green light may not light or the red lights may not light. Could be that nothing lights up, or it could change brightness. So it's a much better idea to figure out how you're going to do this. If you want to swap around bulbs to change colors that way, incandescents are a lot easier to work with, or you can find LED lights that actually use white lights in every one and then colored covers, and that's a better option. My plan was to skip around the wireframe as needed for different colors and either extend the wires between bulbs, so add a little bit of wire between 2 different bulbs, or simply black out some bulbs and then bridge a gap with them. I began putting lights on the frame, cable tying them one by one. Initially I was spacing them out, but then I decided that I wanted my lights to be more dense and hopefully very bright when finished, so I started placing them much closer together. Doing it this way meant using a lot more lights and a lot more cable ties, plus adding a lot of time to the process. I have to say that attaching lights was the one part of this process where I could not wait to get it over with. There are clips made for attaching lights to wireframes that would have to speed up the process as long as you prefer spreading out the bulbs, but to my knowledge they aren't sold in a size for this 9-gauge wire. When I finished my green lights, I had quite a few unused bulbs left in the string. These strings are made up of 3 sections of series wired lights. Each one of the series wired sections must stay intact to maintain the same operation. You can see where the series sections begin and end by finding the spots where there are 2 wires instead of 3. Adding 2 or removing lights from a section can change the brightness of that section, cause them not to light at all, or make them burn out immediately or prematurely. I removed one whole section of lights by cutting them off where 3 wires turn to 2, and then capping and sealing off the cut ends. That way, both of the remaining sections were kept intact. Even after cutting off a whole section, I still had some unused lights, so I bunched those up and later wrapped them in electrical tape so they wouldn't be seen. Then I moved on to the red and white lights. Those needed to jump around a lot more from spot to spot, for example from a glove to his head, or skipping across his belt from his leg to his torso. I did this the easiest way for me by covering lights with electrical tape. Some prefer extending the wires between bulbs by soldering in more wire, but most of my gaps could be covered by blacking out maybe 1 to 5 bulbs, so it didn't make it worth the effort to me. I did cut one section of lights off, and then solder the plug back on the end instead of just sealing them off. That helped me keep all of the strings of lights connected to each other, so I only needed one plug to light the entire piece. Eventually I got all of the lights done, but it took a lot of hours. I even got help for quite a bit of time because I was so tired of tying lights on, and I had blisters on my fingers from doing it. Using as many lights as I did added a noticeable amount of weight to the structure. It seemed to be able to support it, but needed to be handled with a bit more care. The only thing left at this point was to get the wireframe set up in the yard. I bought 3 pieces of steel angle iron to use as stakes. I picked up the last 2 1/8-inch thick by 1-inch wide, 6-foot long pieces of angle iron that Lowe's had around for $16 each. Then I made the mistake of grabbing a piece of 1/8-inch by 1.25 by 6-foot, pre-drilled galvanized for the 3rd stake. It was in a bin labeled with a price of about $20, and then when I went to check out, it turned out to be almost $40. The plain steel bars needed to be drilled so I'd have places to tie the wireframe to them. Then all pieces were cut to a point on their ends to make it easier to drive them into the ground. I gave them all a few coats of paint to finish. I drove the stakes about 18 inches into the ground and placed them 2 feet apart to give me an area about 4 feet wide by 4.5 feet tall to secure Santa to. Then I got Santa and his scooter into position and used some larger cable ties to attach him to the stakes. I only used about 10 cable ties in total, and it's actually pretty secure. We had one day of 30 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts, and it held up fine to that. Here's how it looks when lit. I'm very happy with the end result. I ended up with over 900 lights on this thing, but it made it very bright and visible from a long distance. In the end, it was about $210 for supplies, not including the board for layout, electrical tape, and a few other supplies that I had around. I could have easily used half to a third of the amount of lights that I did if I had just spaced them out further. I bought the zip ties locally at Lowe's, but I'd suggest checking Amazon for a better price on those. After doing this project, I was riding by a local park that had some wireframes out there, so I decided to take a closer look. Look how much wider their bulb spacing is, but still they show up well and look good. I don't regret the choice to use fence wire for this, because it seems to me that it's still sturdy enough that it should hold up for many years as long as it's handled and stored properly. Honestly, I think the biggest problem that I'm going to have with longevity is maintaining the lights. If you wish to make your own wireframe, I would suggest thoroughly planning this out and really going through your choices for lights because, again, you may be able to find something that's easier to install or something that lasts a lot longer and is easier to maintain. Also, I started this very late. Basically, I wanted it up by the time I had started working on it, and I would suggest trying to get a start much earlier. Get this all planned out way before Christmas or way before whenever you want to put up whatever wireframe you're working on, so it's not a rush, because you would be surprised how much time goes into this. That about wraps up my project, but before I go, I want to first say thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, if you found it helpful or interesting, then please be sure to give it a thumbs up, a like, and also don't forget to subscribe for more. In addition, I hope some of you will use this information to create something original. It feels really good when you're done to have something that's all your own, so go out there and create stuff. Thank you again for watching, and happy holidays to everybody.